Today's hearing featured a fiery and revealing exchange between Congressman Ruben Gallego and Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. And let me tell you, Gallego didn't just ask questions, he demanded accountability. The topic? A $50 million private Gulfstream jet that Noem's department requested, all while pushing an expensive, unsustainable deportation agenda and a Republican budget plan that threatens millions of Americans' health care.
Are you going to have access to that $50 million Gulfstream jet that the Coast Guard is going to supply?
The Coast Guard will use that jet exactly how it uses the jets that it has today, exactly in the same manner that it uses the ones that it has in place today.
So would you consistently be using it to travel?
I don't know if I would use that one or if I would use the other one. I have no idea.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Secretary Noem, for attendance today. Let me start by also agreeing with Senator Moreno on some things, and I think it is positive the Trump administration has provided stronger border security to keep illegal border crossings as close to zero as possible. We definitely have seen that in Arizona. My concern is that it's not sustainable. It's expensive. And that's why I recently released a common sense border security that would make it sustainable and would actually deliver long-term solutions. But let me get to my first question. Your department is overspending right now. It's on track to run out of money again by mid-July to support a mass deportation campaign that can't be afforded. At the same time, though, you recently requested a $50 million allotment for a private Gulfstream jet. That's $50 million of taxpayer money to subsidize some of your national tours that you've been going on. Meanwhile, Republicans are about to kick another 13 million people off Medicaid to fund taxes for the rich on the backs of some working-class Americans. So how can you justify spending millions, 50 million, on a jet while your department is definitely overspending and Republicans in Congress are about to strip also health care from millions of Americans?
Well, Senator, thank you for the question. We are spending our dollars appropriately and will be on budget. When your reference to the airframe that was the requested dollars were put in for, that's for the Coast Guard. It's to replace an existing jet that is over 20 years old and is beyond its usable hours. And the Coast Guard for many, many years has been neglected and has many airframe that have been grounded because they can't even be maintained anymore. The suppliers that give us parts and repairs and maintenance for them have said that they'll no longer support that kind of a mission. We have cutters that haven't been completed, that haven't been deployed out across the world. And then we also, beyond that, are asking for a request to build out the number of Coast Guard members that we need in place. We're asking for 15,000 more to complete the missions that are going forward.
Are you going to have access to that $50 million Gulfstream jet that the Coast Guard is going to supply?
The Coast Guard will use that jet exactly how it uses the jets that it has today, exactly in the same manner that it uses the ones that it has in place today.
Would you consistently be using it to travel?
I don't know if I would use that one or if I would use the other one. I have no idea. But I do spend time out there with our components, making sure that they are know that they have a secretary that's engaged with them, that's visiting with them, seeing what their needs are. No, sir, they're not photos. They've meant the world to the individuals at the Department of Homeland Security. They have meant the world to our ICE agents, our border agents. When they ask me to be out there with them so they know what their lives are like.
Talking to some law enforcement, besides those under DHS, we've also seen some law enforcement that have been pulled away from investigations such as child porn, sex trafficking. We've had some agents pulled in that were doing investigations on bank fraud that are now, provisional ICE agents. And I think creating and making them do this type of work is also making us more and more dangerous since they're not actually doing this long-term investigation. On the other hand, I have talked to some border chiefs and sheriffs repeatedly, and they've been highlighting the danger associated with cartels targeting teenagers and border communities through social media apps and recruiting them to participate in smuggling operations. And one of the bills I introduced with several colleagues here actually is the Combating Cartels on Social Media Act, which will help DHS counter this threat. Arizona communities cannot wait for the legislative process to play out on this. What is DHS doing to solve this problem and help keep American children and communities safe from cartel criminal activity and recruitment too?
Well, that is the problem that we have with the longer that they're here, the more established they become and the more they recruit individuals who may live in this country, U.S. citizens, or even our kids to be a part of their operations.
Actually on the other side too. It's both sides.
What do you mean on their side?
Some of the cartels are using social media on, let's say, Mexico,
yes,
wherever.
Yes, definitely they are.
So it's back and forth.
Yes, they definitely are. But they also are infiltrating our country still by recruiting our children to be a part of their networks.
That's the problem. Yeah.
So we're working with not just the experts that we have within CBP and ICE, but also using our other components to address some of the sophistication that we've seen in these apps as far as CISA and partnerships that they may have with private industry that can give us insight in what we can do to deploy our own counter-terrorist activities and applications to those systems, what we can do to make sure that we're stopping their ability to communicate with our children and bringing awareness. The Department of Homeland Security has programs in different areas such as the Know to Protect and the other programs you may be familiar with.
you been able to
with
work directly with the social media companies, though, not just through the
We
legislative
have
process?
had conversations with the social media companies, and
Because
we've,
by the time we get around to doing it,
Right.
we're losing more and more people. So like having a very direct conversation and a concentrated effort to actually have outcomes is going to be quicker because they have the option to do it. We don't have to come in and do it. They just choose not to because they'd rather make more money than anything else.
well, that may be, but I found them very willing to come to the table. I've had myself spent dozens of hours with them, and my team has spent hundreds of hours visiting with them on what we can do to be much more proactive. So they've got some solutions that we can pursue. We'll be coming to you with some of those ideas, but I think it's important that we use their knowledge of this way of communication and recruitment to help protect our children.
Get back.
When Congressman Ruben Gallego questioned Secretary Kristi Noem about her department's $50 million Gulfstream jet request, it wasn't just another heated exchange in Washington. It was a revealing moment about priorities, power, and public trust in American governance. What Gallego did here was simple yet profound. He exposed how political hypocrisy can quietly undermine the very values our government is supposed to uphold. On one hand, the administration claims fiscal responsibility, constantly preaching about cutting waste and living within our means. Yet, here they are, justifying a $50 million luxury aircraft in the middle of a self-inflicted budget crisis. Gallego's point went far beyond numbers. It was about moral clarity. He drew a sharp contrast between how this administration treats public money for working Americans versus how it spends on itself. Millions are being threatened with losing health care, with 13 million people potentially kicked off Medicaid, all while the Department of Homeland Security, under Noem, is requesting an aircraft that costs more than most Americans could earn in a lifetime. This is not about logistics or replacing old planes. It's about symbolism. That jet represents something larger, a growing disconnect between the political elite and the ordinary citizens they're supposed to serve. When those in power prioritize personal convenience or luxury under the guise of operational necessity, they tell Americans, whether intentionally or not, that public service has become secondary to self-service. And the justification? That the aircraft is needed for Coast Guard operations or to support DHS leadership. That's bureaucratic doublespeak, the kind of carefully worded defense used when officials want to sound legitimate but avoid real accountability. Because if this truly were about operational need, Gallego wouldn't have had to ask the obvious question, will you be using that jet personally? Notice how Noem dodged. She didn't deny it, she simply blurred the lines. I don't know if I'd use that one or another one, she said. That is not transparency. That is political evasion dressed in polite words. And for Democrats, that's the core issue, the erosion of transparency, the slow normalization of luxury politics, where taxpayer dollars are repurposed to sustain privilege instead of progress. This exchange also reveals how Republican leadership often weaponizes the language of security and border control to justify excessive spending that doesn't actually solve root problems. They constantly talk about protecting Americans, securing the border, and strengthening the military. But when you peel back the layers, those funds often get redirected toward vanity projects or personal indulgences. Meanwhile, real security, economic, healthcare, education, environmental, is ignored. It's a kind of selective patriotism. Protect the border, but not the family who can't afford their child's medication. Secure the coastlines, but not the worker who just lost their job when a plant closed. Gallego's questioning hits a nerve because he's not just challenging the purchase of a jet, he's challenging a worldview that treats government as a business for profit, not a platform for people. He's reminding Americans that leadership is supposed to be about stewardship, about using power responsibly, not lavishly. And let's be clear, this isn't only about optics, it's about equity and ethics. When working families are told to make sacrifices, when nurses, teachers, and federal employees struggle under inflation, it is deeply unethical for any government official to demand luxury expenditures at public expense. The hypocrisy is staggering. Democrats like Gallego are asking the hard questions not because it's political theater, but because accountability is what keeps democracy healthy. Without it, corruption becomes normalized and cynicism spreads like a virus. When people lose faith that their leaders understand their struggles, democracy weakens, not from foreign threats, but from internal decay. Now, it's worth noting how Noem tried to pivot, bringing up issues like border security, drug trafficking, and cartel recruitment. Those are serious issues, no doubt. But that pivot was deliberate. It's a strategy to deflect scrutiny by redirecting the conversation to emotional, fear-based topics. It's the same playbook we've seen repeatedly: distract the public with fear so they don't ask about fairness. And that's exactly what Gallego refused to let happen. He kept the focus on the moral contradiction, the idea that you cannot claim to be fiscally conservative while demanding taxpayer-funded luxury. You can't preach about protecting Americans while cutting off their health care and spending millions on personal comfort. This hearing wasn't just an argument. It was a moment of truth. It forced us to ask a deeper question about what kind of country we want to be. Do we want a government that serves everyone, or one that rewards those already in power? Do we want leaders who lead by example, or those who lead by entitlement? Ruben Gallego's voice in this exchange stands as a reminder that public service must be grounded in empathy and responsibility. It's not about jets or budgets alone. It's about restoring faith in a government that puts people first. And that, at its core, is what democratic governance strives for: a system where compassion isn't seen as weakness, but as wisdom. If we are to rebuild trust in our institutions, we have to start demanding more from our leaders: transparency, humility, and above all, integrity. Because when public office becomes a platform for personal indulgence, democracy itself becomes the casualty. So the next time you hear about tight budgets or cutting costs, ask yourself, whose costs are being cut? When the powerful fly high on luxury jets and the working class is told to make do, something is deeply broken. And fixing it starts with accountability, the kind that Ruben Gallego demonstrated in that hearing. Tough questions, honest confrontation, and a refusal to let privilege hide behind policy. If you believe in that kind of leadership, one that works for the many, not the few, make sure you stay informed, stay vocal, and stay engaged. Because democracy doesn't defend itself. We do.